The crash of a beer glass shattering at the Rusty Nail in Oak Ridge rang out like the shot that started a storm. Carl Thompson, 79 years old, collapsed to the floor, blood seeping from his forehead. Before him, the biker Tank wore a contemptuous smirk. The crowd fell silent, but Carl, the old Vietnam soldier, refused to stay down. What will he do now? Pushed into the dark corner of oblivion? What secret lies behind that unyielding gaze? Brace yourself. This story will send shivers down your spine. Subscribe and hit the notification bell now. Don't miss a single dramatic twist, only on our channel. A Black Hawk helicopter is coming. It carries justice. Are you ready? The beer glass clattered to the floor of the Rusty Nail bar, shattering into shards. The sharp sound pierced the night like a gunshot. Carl Thompson, 79, pitched forward, his knee slamming into the cold concrete. Blood oozed from the tear in his forehead, dripping onto his tattered military jacket, where the faded Vietnam 1969 patch still stood proud. The hulking biker, his leather jacket gleaming, the iron skull's patch studded with rivets, stood with arms folded, sneering. He'd shoved Carl when the old man accidentally bumped the table and spilled his cheap beer. The crowd, from those nursing pints at the bar to the couples in the shadows, fell silent, their eyes averted, as if the floor held more interest. Carl, his silver hair a tangled mess, reached for the chipped wooden table to pull himself up. His war-scarred arm trembled, lacking the strength. His threadbare cap, Vietnam vet, embroidered in gold thread, lay in the dust and foam. Tank, the biker's nickname among his gang, stepped forward. His heavy boot crushed Carl's cap, as though he sought to crush the veteran's memories. His rasping laugh echoed through the stifling air, joined by 5 other bikers' jeers, like wolves howling in the dark. "What's wrong with you, old man?" Tank snarled, tattooed arms flashing images of cobras and daggers. Carl did not cry out. He did not curse. He simply reached, his fingers shaking, as if to reclaim that cap, his gaze dim yet glinting with an uncanny patience, as though he had weathered darker storms. But Tank wasn't finished. He bent down, yanked Carl's collar, and shoved him again. Carl's head struck the table leg, blood flowing faster, staining the collar red. The bar's atmosphere grew heavy as lead. Behind the counter, Jenny the waitress gripped her cloth, blinking rapidly to hide her fear. She wanted to scream, to stop it, but Tank's cold stare froze her. Other patrons, from the weary laborer to the flannel-clad elder in the corner, bowed their heads, sipped their beers, or pretended to check their phones. No one dared intervene. Oak Ridge was a small town. People knew each other, and they knew better than to cross an out-of-town biker gang. Carl lay on the floor, blood dripping, but he did not beg. Slowly, he crawled toward his cap, clutching its brim like a lifeline to a memory he refused to lose. Tank, looming above, smirked and kicked the cap farther away. A sick game. Carl did not look at him. He pushed himself up on one hand, blood seeping through his jacket, staining the stitching. The bikers roared with laughter. Their jeers sliced the air like knives. Yet in Carl's eyes there was no fear, only resolve, like a soldier who once lay silent in the Vietnamese jungle, waiting for the enemy to pass. Silently, he pulled the flip phone from his pocket. His thin, scarred finger pressed the pre-programmed button. The screen glowed dimly. SOS, Rusty Nail. Carl was no tech wizard, but his son Ethan had taught him this trick, for moments like this. He slipped the phone back, his gaze toward the window where the pale moonlight fell on the dirt road into town. No one in the bar noticed, but Carl knew a storm was coming, and it would show no mercy. From behind the counter, Jenny stole a glance at Carl. Guilt rippled through her like a wave. She had heard his stories of Vietnam, his voice low and soft, as if recounting someone else's tale. Now, seeing him on the floor, bleeding, she wanted to flee. But an old man in a flannel jacket in the corner quietly drew out his phone. His finger trembled as he typed a message. In Oak Ridge, news traveled fast, especially when a veteran was insulted. Carl gripped his cap, pressed it to his head, the dried blood on his brow, his eyes fixed on the window. The bikers still laughed, Tank still growled, but Carl paid them no mind. He knew that in just 25 minutes, everything would change. Outside, the ground began to tremble faintly, like a distant engine. But no one in the bar noticed except Carl, the old soldier accustomed to waiting. Under the dim amber lights of the rusty nail bar, Carl Thompson sat slumped in his chair. Dried blood on his forehead formed a dark streak, seeping into the collar of his threadbare military jacket. His Vietnam vet cap, which he had just retrieved, sat askew on his head. It hid eyes clouded yet piercing, eyes that seemed to stare through time, back to the jungles of Vietnam, where death lurked behind every thicket. Carl paid no mind to Tank's rasping laughter or the biker gang. He ignored the averted gazes of the crowd. He raised what was left of his beer in a slow sip. The bitterness slid down his throat like an old memory. His gaunt, scarred hand gripped the wooden cane etched with Firebase Ripcord 1970, not to lean on, but to hold on to a part of himself. Carl knew that, in 25 minutes, the storm would arrive, and he needed only patience, as he had shown on those long, gunfire-lit nights. The Rusty Nail wasn't Carl's favorite spot, yet every Wednesday night he came here for a slice of calm amid lonely days. Oak Ridge, with its dirt roads and ancient oaks, had been his home since he left the service in 1972. He lived alone in a small wooden house, its walls bare. No family photos, no medals, just a wooden box under his bed, holding faded pictures and an unsent letter from a fallen comrade. The townsfolk knew him as a kindly old man, nodding hello, but never probing his past. They saw him hobble with his cane and assumed he was just another veteran scraping by on benefits. But Carl was no ordinary retiree. He had been a scout in Vietnam, leading men through gun-swept jungles and dragging wounded comrades from the line of fire, despite a bleeding shoulder wound. The map-like scars on his arms told stories he never shared, not even with his son. Oak Ridge was small. Everyone recognized one another, but few cared to dig deeper. The Rusty Nail, with its beer-stained concrete floor and battered wooden tables, served as the town's social hub. Workers, farmers, and the occasional veteran gathered here. Carl did not come to chat. He came to sit quietly, watch cars pass by the window, and let memories drift by like clouds. His patched and faded jacket was the only reminder of his past. Occasionally, Jenny the waitress would ask about Vietnam. He'd smile, offer a brief line about the jungle or the night sky, then steer the conversation away. He did not want war memories treated as entertainment. But tonight, his peace was shattered. 6 out-of-town bikers swaggered in, claiming the Rusty Nail as their own. They banged bottle caps on the floor and took over the corner. When Carl accidentally bumped Tank's table, spilling his beer, the giant with the braided mane and cobra tattoos decided to make him a spectacle. Tank, hair tied back and arms inked with venomous snakes, sought not only to flaunt power, but to dominate. He saw Carl, the frail old man with a cane, as the perfect target. The first shove drew Tank's triumphant roar. The second, he snatched Carl's cane and flung it aside, his gang's laughter echoing like wolves. Carl did not struggle or beg. He crawled to retrieve the cane, his grip unyielding, eyes fixed on Tank, not with fear, but with the steady calm of one who has stared death in the face, lain motionless in the mud, waiting for enemies to pass. He knew that reacting now would only worsen things. Instead, he chose patience, as he had at Ripcord, leading men through an ambush and saving a dozen souls under machine gun fire. His flip phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. The SOS Rusty Nail message had been sent. Carl wasn't tech-savvy, but his son Ethan, a major at Fort Bradley, had set up that emergency alert 2 years ago, when Carl began relying on his cane, and Oak Ridge grew uneasy with outside gangs. Ethan always worried about his father, though he never said it. Carl pressed the button, slipped the phone away, and gazed out the window where pale moonlight lit the dirt road. He did not need a clock. He felt time in his bones, as he once sensed a comrade's heartbeat in the jungle. The bikers still laughed. Tank still growled. But Carl paid them no mind. He took another sip of beer. Its bitterness reminded him of days gone by. Outside, the ground trembled faintly, like a distant engine. But no one in the bar noticed except Carl. He knew the storm was coming, and it would show no mercy. From behind the counter, Jenny stole a glance. Guilt washed over her in waves. She had heard him speak of Ripcord, his voice low as if recounting another man's tale. Now, seeing him seated there with dried blood on his brow and his cane lying abandoned, she longed to run away. An elderly man in a flannel jacket rose quietly from the corner and stepped outside, phone pressed to his ear. In Oak Ridge, news spread fast, especially when a veteran was dishonored. Carl gripped his cane, eyes never leaving the window, as though counting seconds. The bikers still laughed, but he did not hear them. He heard only the wind outside, the growing tremor beneath the earth, and his own heartbeat, steady, resolute, like the old soldier awaiting his moment. The darkness beyond the Rusty Nail's window was thick. Only the pale moonlight pierced it, casting a weak glow on the dirt road into Oak Ridge. Inside, the air was as heavy as lead. The scent of stale beer and cigarette smoke clung to every corner. Carl Thompson, 79 years old, sat motionless in his chair. Dried blood on his forehead formed a dark streak, soaking into the collar of his tattered military jacket. In his hand lay the wooden cane carved with Firebase Ripcord 1970. His gaunt fingers gripped it not for support, but to hold on to an inviolable memory. A few steps away, Tank, the hulking biker in glossy leather with an iron skull's patch, stood arms crossed. His sneer dripped with contempt. He ripped a beer from a companion's hand and poured it out across the floor before Carl. Foam splashed onto the veteran's boots. 5 other bikers laughed, their voices sharp as knives, slicing through the bar's hushed silence. Carl did not flinch, his clouded eyes fixed on Tank, as if the man were a ghost in a Vietnam jungle long ago. Tank strode forward, his heavy boot pressed into the beer spill and halted mere inches from Carl. He bent low, whiskey-scented breath hot on Carl's face, and jeered, "You asleep, old man, or just frozen with fear?" He yanked the Vietnam vet cap from Carl's head and flung it down. He stamped on it, as though crushing the veteran's memories. His gang joined in, one of them kicking the cap into a corner strewn with bottle caps and dust. Carl made no sound. He did not beg. He slowly stooped, hand reaching for his cap. Each movement pained him, yet he was resolute, like a soldier crawling through mud under enemy fire. The patrons, from those sipping drafts at the bar to the couples in the shadows, remained silent. Jenny, the waitress behind the counter, stood trembling with her rag. Her eyes blinked rapidly to hide her fear. She wanted to do something, to shout, but Tank's cold stare froze her in place. In the corner, an old man in flannel rubbed his trembling hands as he texted on his phone. His glance flicked to Carl, laced with regret. Carl seized his cap, brushed off the grime with his sleeve, and placed it back upon his head. The dried blood across his brow made the Vietnam vet embroidery stand out beneath the dim lights. Tank, seeing no reaction, grew more aggressive. He ripped the cane from Carl's hand, hoisted it like a trophy, and hurled it into a corner where it struck the wall with a crack. "What do you need this for, Grandpa?" Tank snarled. His crew's laughter rang out, carving through the suffocating air. Carl said nothing. His gaze remained calm, as if Tank did not exist. He crawled to retrieve his cane. His hand trembled as it touched the carved wood. Each nick a memory of ripcord, of long nights under enemy fire, of comrades he'd dragged back from death's edge. His flip phone buzzed again in his jacket pocket. The SOS rusty nail message had reached his son Ethan. Carl slipped the phone away and turned his eyes to the window. The pale moonlight was blurring beneath the shadow of something approaching. The bar's atmosphere grew even heavier, like the calm before a storm. From behind the counter, Jenny stole another look at Carl. Waves of guilt washed over her. She remembered him speaking of ripcord, his voice low, as though recounting another man's tale. But now, seeing him crawling on the floor, blood soaking his jacket, the cane lying discarded, she wanted only to flee. A weary laborer near the door bowed his head, grip tightening around his beer. He seemed intent on forgetting his own cowardice. The flannel-clad old man, having sent his message, looked back at Carl with sorrow in his eyes. In Oak Ridge, news traveled fast, especially when a veteran was insulted. Yet no one dared intervene. No one dared face Tank and his gang, the hulking bullies ready to make anyone their next prey. Tank stood with arms folded, a mocking grin on his lips. He kicked Carl's leg lightly, testing for a reaction. But Carl did not look at him. He settled back into his chair, gripping his cane, dried blood on his brow, eyes fixed on the window, as if counting each second. Beneath the floorboards, the tremor grew stronger. The glass on the bar shook ever so slightly, but the bikers were too drunk to notice. Tank, reeking of liquor, continued his taunts. He tugged at Carl's jacket, exposing the faded Vietnam 1969 patch still proud. "You picked that up at a flea market, Grandpa?" he growled. The gang erupted in laughter. Carl did not respond. His gaze remained outside, where the trembling intensified, like the distant hum of a helicopter's rotor. He did not need a watch. He felt the time, as he once felt a comrade's pulse in the jungle, waiting for the decisive moment. Jenny, from behind the counter, heard the tremor and felt her heart pound, though she could not fathom its source. Outside, the flannel-clad man looked skyward, hope flashing in his eyes. Carl took his final sip of beer. Its bitterness slid down his throat, reminding him of days long past. He knew the storm was almost upon them, and it would show no mercy. The bikers still laughed. Tank still snarled, but Carl did not hear them. He listened only to the wind outside, the growing tremor beneath the ground, and his own heartbeat, steady, unflinching, like the old soldier awaiting justice. The roar of a helicopter engine tore through Oak Ridge's night sky like a blade slicing through thick darkness. Inside the rusty nail, the beer glass on the bar trembled, foam spilling over the rim. Carl Thompson, 79 years old, sat motionless, dried blood on his brow, his hand gripping the carved cane inscribed Firebase Ripcord 1970. He did not look at Tank, the mocking biker, nor at the silent crowd with their averted eyes. Carl's gaze was locked on the window, where the helicopter's spotlight began to pierce the gloom, brighter than a midday sun in the dead of night. The tremor beneath the floor was unmistakable now, like the heartbeat of a giant beast drawing near. Tank, drunk on bravado, still sneered. He yanked Carl's jacket, exposing the faded Vietnam 1969 patch. "Planning another hero act, Grandpa?" he snarled, but his voice quavered as the helicopter's engine drowned out his gang's laughter. Carl remained silent, serene. The old soldier, knowing justice's moment was imminent. 20 miles away at Fort Bradley, everything moved like a finely tuned machine. Lieutenant Colonel Ethan Thompson, 45, stood in the command center, his eyes cold as the SOS Rusty Nail alert from his father lit up his secure phone. Without hesitation, he ordered in his deep, decisive tone, "Alpha Team, prepare the Black Hawk. Launch immediately." The control room burst into action. 8 Special Ops soldiers in black tactical gear moved with lethal speed, checking rifles, donning comm headsets, and sprinting to the landing pad. The base's floodlights illuminated the Black Hawk. Its rotors spun to life, thunder rolling across the field. Ethan, a veteran of Iraq and Syria, commanded the region's premier rapid response unit. He'd never detailed his work to his father, only saying he worked at the base. Yet Carl, the old fighter, always knew his son was a warrior, just as he once was. Ethan boarded the Black Hawk, clutching a photo in his pocket. Carl and young Ethan at his officer commissioning. The Vietnam vet cap tilted proudly, a humble yet triumphant smile on Carl's face. "Stay strong, Dad," Ethan whispered as the chopper lifted off, slicing through the wind toward Oak Ridge. Inside, the team was silent, each man checking equipment with absolute focus. Corporal Kelly, expert marksman, inspected her barrel. Lieutenant Diaz, tactical specialist, reviewed the Oak Ridge map on his tablet. Ethan sat beside the pilot, headset on, eyes never leaving the radar screen. He knew his father would not trigger an SOS unless the danger was real. Carl, who once dragged 12 men from a ripcord ambush, was no quitter. But at 79, with only a cane and weary legs, he was no soldier of 50 years ago. Ethan's fist clenched, worry and resolve surging together. Back in the bar, Tank continued his sick amusement. He seized Carl's cane, raised it like a trophy, then hurled it into a corner where it banged against the wall. "What do you need this for, old man?" he jeered. His crew snickered, their laughter slicing through the stifling air. Carl said nothing. His eyes remained on the window, where the Black Hawk's spotlight now blazed through the glass, illuminating his scarred face. Jenny, the waitress, trembled behind the counter. Her heart pounded as the tremor grew stronger. She did not know what was coming, but Carl's unshakable calm told her something monumental was at hand. The flannel-clad elder outside stared skyward, hope igniting in his eyes. A weary worker by the door bowed his head, clutching his beer in remorse for his inaction. Ethan, aboard the Black Hawk, heard the pilot's update. "ETA 5 minutes." He nodded, holstered his sidearm, eyes steely. The team was ready. Each man knew his role. Kelly would cover the front entrance. Diaz would lead in through the back. Two others would secure the perimeter. Ethan would go straight to his father. He thought of nothing but Carl, who taught him to stand tall and never give up. The Blackhawks sliced over the pitch-black fields. The lights of Oak Ridge appeared below, small, yet clear. Ethan pressed his forehead to the window, his heart racing. He recalled his last words to Carl. The old man, leaning on his cane, had smiled and said, "Son, don't worry about me. I survived ripcord." Now, Ethan worried, not because his father was weak, but because no one deserved such humiliation. Inside, Tank, half-drunk, failed to notice the floor's growing tremor. He yanked Carl's jacket again, revealing the proud Vietnam 1969 patch. "You get this at a flea market, Grandpa?" he taunted. His gang hurled bottle caps at Carl. Still, Carl did not flinch. His gaze remained outside, where the spotlight now shone like daylight. He knew that in mere minutes, everything would change. He lifted his final sip of beer, the bitterness washing down his throat, a reminder of Ripcord's long nights of waiting for survival. Tank kicked Carl's leg gently, testing for movement. But Carl did not look at him. He listened only to the wind outside, the helicopter's rotor growing nearer, and his own heartbeat, steady, unwavering, like a veteran awaiting justice. Dear viewers, grab a glass of water, relax for a moment, and stay tuned for the next twist. This story's surprises aren't over yet. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see friends joining us from around the world. If you think this tale is gripping, comment 1 below so we can keep delivering more thrilling stories for you. The Rusty Nail's door burst open. The wood cracked under the force as if swept away by a storm. The Blackhawk's spotlight cut through the night like a sword, illuminating Carl Thompson's scarred face. The rotor's roar thundered. The beer glass on the bar trembled, foam spilling onto the stained concrete. Carl, 79, sat motionless, dried blood on his brow, his hand gripping the cane-carved Firebase Ripcord 1970. The bikers, led by Tank, froze. Their grins vanished as 8 dark figures leapt from the Blackhawk, rifles raised, moving like ghosts in the night. Lieutenant Colonel Ethan Thompson, 45, strode in at their head. His face was steel, eyes sweeping the bar until they landed on his father, Carl, seated amid chaos, his tattered military jacket stained with blood. The helicopter's engine drowned out all sound, pronouncing judgment on those who dared harm the old soldier. Ethan's boots struck the floor like war drums. His team fanned out behind him, 2 sealing the front door, 2 flanking the bikers, rifles never lowering. Tank, that hulking figure in his iron skull's leather, staggered back. His hand trembled as he dropped his beer, shards shattering underfoot. His 5 cronies stood frozen, panic and helplessness flickering in their eyes. Ethan ignored them. He knelt beside Carl, brushing the dried blood from his father's forehead. His cold gaze softened for a moment. Carl nodded. His clouded eyes shone with trust, like a soldier who has watched comrades cross life and death. Ethan rose and faced Tank, tall, if he needed no raised voice to command. "Who did this?" Tank stammered, trying to sound brave. "Just a joke. Old man bumped me." Ethan stepped closer, his single stride sending Tank retreating into his friends. "This old man saved 12 soldiers at Ripcord, before you were even born." Ethan's words cut the suffocating air like a blade. The patrons, from the head-bowed laborer to the couples in the shadows, whispered, their indifference melting into astonishment. Jenny, the waitress, trembling, emerged from behind the bar, holding Carl's cane, her eyes red with apology. She placed the cane in his hand and mouthed a wordless sorry. Carl gripped it. His gaze held no blame, only a slight nod, as if accepting repentance belatedly offered. Under Ethan's command, the special ops team tightened their circle. Corporal Kelly, the sharpshooter by the entrance, trained her rifle on Tank with ice in her eyes. Lieutenant Diaz at the back signaled two others to secure the remaining bikers. No one moved. Tank, once a snarling beast, hunched his shoulders, eyes darting for an escape. There was none. Outside, the Black Hawk's rotors still thundered. Its spotlight streamed through the window, a reminder that justice had arrived. Carl rose slowly, cane tapping the floor. His posture straightened, as if age and wounds had lifted. The dried blood on his brow and his worn jacket mattered not. His eyes blazed with the fire that never died since ripcord. He stepped to the center of the bar. Each tap of his cane echoed like a drumbeat calling forth the past. The crowd was silent, no longer avoiding his gaze. The laborer by the door lifted his head, remorse in his eyes. The flannel-clad elder re-entered, clutching his phone as though he'd just witnessed a miracle. Ethan stood behind his father, speechless. Pride shone in his eyes, like the young soldier who once watched Carl teach him to stand firm in any storm. Tank, now only a shadow of his former menace, recoiled, bumping into a table and knocking over another beer. He tried to speak, but the words choked off under Carl's commanding presence. No words needed to subdue a bully. The special ops team did not need to fire a shot. Their mere presence, in black tactical gear, rifles at the ready, was enough to cow the bikers. Ethan signaled, and two operators moved forward, cuffing Tank and his fiercest accomplice. The rest remained still, heads bowed like trapped animals. Outside, a patrol car skidded to a halt. Blue and red lights flashed, but the officer simply watched, knowing Ethan's team had it under control. Jenny emerged, offering Carl a fresh towel. Her hand shook. She spoke no words, but her gaze, full of respect, said everything. Carl wiped the blood from his brow. His eyes scanned the room, not seeking pity or applause, but to remind them all. He did not need them to stand or clap. Yet they did, one by one, led not by Ethan or the Black Hawk, but by Carl himself, the old soldier who paid dearly so they could drink in peace. Outside, the Black Hawk's rotors still churned, stirring dust and dry leaves along the dirt road. Ethan grasped his father's shoulder. In his eyes was not just a lieutenant's duty, but a son's gratitude. Carl, cane in hand, stepped toward the door. The helicopter's spotlight crowned him with a warrior's halo. The crowd, from the laborer to the flannel-clad elder, watched in awe, as if witnessing a living legend. Tank, handcuffed and head bowed, could not meet Carl's gaze. He did not know that his cruelty had awakened not only a man, but the spirit of Oak Ridge itself. Carl paused at the threshold, eyes on the Black Hawk where Ethan stood beside him. Father and son exchanged a wordless glance, heavy with meaning. He knew justice had come, but the greatest surprise still lay ahead. The sky over Oak Ridge brightened as dawn slipped through the ancient oaks, bathing the dirt road to the rusty nail in gold. Carl Thompson, 79, stepped from the bar's shadow. His cane carved Firebase Ripcord 1970, tapping the ground like the heartbeat of a town waking. His threadbare military jacket, stained with dried blood from a gash on his brow, fluttered in the morning breeze, the faded Vietnam 1969 patch, still proud in the first light. Outside, the Black Hawk helicopter rested on the open field, its rotors stilled, yet its presence stood as an unshakable declaration. Ethan Thompson, 45, stood beside his father, hand gently on his shoulder, eyes betraying pride and relief. The bikers, led by Tank, stood handcuffed, heads bowed under the steely gaze of the task force, led to the waiting patrol car whose flashing lights broke the dawn's hush. Yet Carl did not look at them. He gazed toward the town, where Oak Ridge's residents began to gather, their eyes no longer indifferent, but brimming with respect. Jenny, the waitress, stood at the bar's threshold, clutching her rag, eyes red but alight with resolve. She stepped forward, offering Carl a cold bottle of water, her hand trembling. He accepted with a slight nod, eyes free of blame, as though a seasoned soldier understands that remorse, even late, still holds value. The patrons, from the laborer who once cast his eyes downward to the flannel-clad elder, emerged, lining the dirt road in silent tribute. No applause, no cheers, only hushed reverence, as though Carl were a flag that never fell. Another veteran, hair silver, in a worn jacket, approached with a crisp military salute. His hand shook, yet his resolve was firm. Carl returned the salute, slow, precise, like ripcord days, when each greeting was a promise of survival. Others followed suit, wordlessly transforming the road into an unspoken rite. Ethan stepped back, letting his father take center stage. No words were needed. His eyes, aglow in the dawn, spoke volumes. He recalled nights when Carl spoke of ripcord in a low tone, never boasting, merely chronicling history. A young Ethan once asked why those medals were never displayed, why the town knew nothing. Carl simply smiled, patted his son's shoulder, and said, "Medals don't keep you alive, son." Now, watching his father stand there, blood dried on his brow, cane in hand, Ethan understood. Carl didn't need medals. He was the medal. A living witness to a war Oak Ridge had long forgotten. The task force, having handed the bikers over to the police, formed ranks behind Ethan, rifles lowered but respect unmistakable. Corporal Kelly, the sharpshooter, gave Carl a quiet nod as if greeting a legend. Lieutenant Diaz, tactical specialist, stood silent, admiration shining in his gaze. Oak Ridge's townspeople, now more numerous, gathered before the rusty nail, not for the Black Hawk or the commandos, but for Carl, the old soldier they once passed on the sidewalk without a glance. A salt-and-pepper-haired woman stepped forward, clutching a faded photograph of a young soldier beside Carl in Vietnam. "My brother," she whispered, tears glittering. "He said you pulled him through the jungle." Carl studied the photo, fingers trembling over its edge, eyes distant before he nodded in solemn acknowledgement. The woman turned away, shoulders shaking, yet gratitude shone in her eyes. Others approached, offering quiet gestures. A service coin, a hastily folded letter, a firm handshake. Carl accepted them all, gaze steady, as one who knows recognition needs no words. The next morning, a wooden plaque appeared before the rusty nail, etched, "Honoring Carl Thompson, Ripcord, 1970, the soldier who never fell." No one knew who placed it there, but it stood as steadfast as Carl in the early sun. Jenny, opening the bar, paused before it, fingers tracing the inscription through tears. She returned inside, retrieved a small photo of Carl from the ripcord evening he'd shared, and placed it behind the bar, a promise never to forget. Oak Ridge's people, from the laborer to the flannel-clad elder, paused before the plaque in silent homage, as though relearning respect. Before returning to Fort Bradley, Ethan stood with his father beneath that dawn light, eyes alight with faith. "You did it, Dad," he whispered, hand on Carl's shoulder. Carl did not reply. He only nodded, gaze fixed on the horizon where the sunrise still blazed. But the greatest surprise came 3 days later. A plain white envelope, no return address, slid under Carl's door. The scrawled handwriting trembled, urgent. Carl opened it, eyes sweeping each line. "I am Tank. I was wrong. What I did cannot be forgiven, but if you'll allow me, I wish to make amends. I will come to the Veterans Center and serve, as you once did." Carl folded the letter, set it on his table, eyes distant. He said nothing. Instead, he stepped onto his porch, seated himself on the wooden chair, and watched Oak Ridge, now transformed. The old soldier who had pulled 12 men from the ripcord ambush needed no medals, no apologies. He only needed Oak Ridge to remember, and they had remembered. Tank's letter, small though it was, proved that even wayward souls can awaken, just like this town, and just like Carl, the soldier who never fell. Carl Thompson's silhouette faded beneath Oak Ridge's dawn, yet his story is only the beginning. The old soldiers, their dignity unbowed, still live among us, waiting to be told. Who will be next? A female veteran in Texas? A forgotten hero in Chicago? Leave your thoughts, share your comments, spread these remarkable tales to your family and friends across the United States. Each share is a flame igniting the legacy. Stay tuned. The next surprise is coming, more dramatic than ever.